And we'll bring you more of the president's reaction throughout the course of our bulletins. But let's go to this Israeli human rights lawyer and the International Legal Forum CEO, Arsen Ostrovsky, joins us live now. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. We had a conversation here on the show with an associate professor who has been watching these developments in The Hague for us. And she says that for her, this is more of the same. The court did not go far enough in its ruling against Israel. And I wonder, what is your reaction to that and your reaction to the ruling?
Well, I must first of all say, having just heard President Ramaphosa's words and hearing him invoke those two words, never again, and with what irony he used those words, because today is the eve of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The very term genocide itself was created in the wake of the Holocaust to describe the attempted systematic annihilation of the Jewish people. And here we are today again, where South Africa is weaponizing and perverting the very meaning of the term genocide to attack the state of Israel following the most heinous attack that we have seen in the nation's history. Quite frankly, it is not Israel that ought to have been on trial today, but Hamas, who carried out this monstrous act of evil. And I would add one step further. Perhaps South Africa ought to be more concerned about having proper running water and providing for its own citizens than acting as a legal arm of Hamas in these mendacious and baseless proceedings against the state of Israel.
How do you contend with those who say that, for them, when they look at what Hamas did on October 7th, I'm sure you've seen this, in the public domain, who say that that particular action does not warrant or match the scale at which Israel has responded?
Look, I don't think anyone is denying, nor has Israel, that there has been enormous loss of life and widespread destruction. However, it is imperative to recognize, and that is something that South African case failed to do so, that the onus on that lies with Hamas. Israel has been entirely clear that its intention is very clear, is the destruction of Hamas, a recognized international terror group, and the rescue of its hostages. It is Hamas that holds its own civilians as human shields. It is Hamas that hides behind hospitals and places its weapons and infrastructure in homes, schools, and mosques. It is Hamas that is committing essentially a double war crime of hiding behind their own people whilst indiscriminately targeting civilians in Israel. Israel has gone above and beyond its obligations under international law to provide warnings to civilians in Gaza, to provide safe passage. No other army in the world telegraphs its intentions ahead of time and puts their own soldiers at risk. But Israel has done that, and it has discharged and continues to discharge their obligations fully in accordance with international humanitarian law.
And what do you say then to those who say there hasn't been proof in that regard, especially the allegations and what you just said now about Hamas? Because there are some people who are saying that where is the proof and why was it not shown conclusively to the world?
Well, in fact, the proof was shown quite conclusively during Israel's presentations, including by the Deputy Attorney General's Department, Advocate Galit Sejuan. They showed through entire proceedings that Israel conducted on the Friday following South Africa's case, where they showed the extent to which Israel has gone to avoid and minimize civilian casualties. The number, which is in the millions of warnings of telephone calls and leaflets Israel has provided, they showed the exact safe passage and routes that the Israeli Defense Forces have informed the civilians in Gaza to evacuate. But it is Hamas that continues to use their own people as shields. It is Hamas that continues to put their own people cynically at risk. And that is who we need to call out.
But one would then ask, was an hour enough, though, in one of the instances where we saw the warnings come up? And in fact, we were live on the show as we were looking at this, with people being asked to move and really find a safe passage. And people were saying that there is no safe place in Gaza. They are concerned about the bombardment as well. So was that time sufficient, would you argue, as a human rights lawyer?
Look, in an ideal world, Israel wouldn't be operating here at all. But we still have 136 hostages that are being held captive in Gaza, and Hamas is continuing to fire rockets. In fact, barely minutes after this decision was handed down, Hamas fired another barrage of rockets at southern Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces are operating in exceptionally difficult circumstances in a heavily populated civilian area, and they're going above and beyond. We saw only the other day, in fact, when something like 24 Israeli soldiers died, and they died in large part because they put their own lives at risk to target Hamas and to avoid casualties in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces and Israel, in fact, cares more about civilians in Gaza than Hamas does. That continues to cynically hide behind their own people and use hospitals, schools and homes as launching pads against Israel. The IDF has gone above and beyond what any other army in modern warfare has done in order to mitigate any kind of civilian risk and harm here.
And I'm going to ask you just a question as a follow-up in that regard, but just after this one, you know, the hostages, the court touching on them as well to say that they must be released. These, of course, to some may be numbers, but let's talk about the reality on the ground. These are family members whose families would probably be looking to see if they're coming back. What has been the devastation in that particular regard as well?
I can assure you, to the State of Israel, these are not mere numbers. These 136 people, young women, elderly men and babies, including 1-year-old Kfir Bibas, who just turned 1 year old in Hamas captivity and has now spent almost 1/3 of his life as a hostage. So to Israelis, these are not mere numbers, these are people, these are loved ones, and Israel will do whatever necessary in order to rescue them. In fact, barely an hour ago, and not long after the court ended its judgment, the Hamas terror group once again released a sadistic propaganda video with 3 female hostages. Time is not on their side, and the world needs to pressure Hamas. And that obligation, by the way, extends to South Africa, which is so far, instead of holding Hamas accountable, has embraced this terrorist organization. So South Africa has an onus and a duty upon its own obligations under the Genocide Convention, in fact, to put pressure on Hamas to surrender, to lay down their arms, and to release the remaining hostages.
As a lawyer, if you were to sit right now with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, would you advise him to abide by the court's order?
Look, the court made a number of determinations. It's important to note also, in addition to the release of Israeli hostages, the court also did not make, one, any determinations as to the substance of South Africa's allegations, and number 2, the court did not order a ceasefire, and it expressly permitted Israel to continue its military operations within the parameters of international law, which so far Israel continues to abide by.
But the court did say that Israel needs to take every measure in its power to prevent, acts of genocide and also punish them. So some have been saying, in fact, the legal minds that have been speaking to us tonight, and I wonder if you share this view as well, have been saying that how do you do that without halting the military operations in order to ensure that there is a prevention of a further loss of life, there is humanitarian assistance that reaches the people on the ground. And I wonder if you do share that view as well.
Well, Israel is doing, I believe, everything possible in order to facilitate the transfer of humanitarian aid. We've seen something like, I believe, 10,000 tons. I'm not sure the exact number, but literally hundreds of trucks of humanitarian aid each day. Even more can be facilitated and provided where the UN to allow additional facilitation, expedition of the process. Israel, I believe, would like to provide even further aid, but we have to remember that Hamas is still firing rockets. Hamas is still conducting terrorist operations, and Hamas is still holding 136 civilians, including young women, elderly and babies hostage. This whole crisis can end tomorrow if Hamas were to lay down their arms and release all the hostages.
It's one thing to talk about Hamas, but also we saw visuals of Israeli protesters themselves blockading a truck that was heading to the people of Gaza to deliver humanitarian assistance.
Look, the Israelis, as many Israelis as you can understand it, specifically families of hostages, are understandably frustrated. These trucks have gone through. The Israelis were expressing, obviously, a level of concern and frustration that hostages remain captive in Gaza. I would hope that South Africa would apply additional pressure. We all would. We have seen a number of leading democracies from the US, Germany, UK, Austria, Czech Republic, Italy, France, Italy and France have all come out to condemn these proceedings, and specifically South Africa's politicization of the International Court, which can be described here, quite frankly, as a subversion of the very meaning of the term genocide for political means. So I would hope that South Africa, like other democracies, will instead call on Hamas to lay down its arms, to release the hostages, and then we can all see once again, hopefully, Gaza flourishing, and the people of Gaza have every opportunity which they equally deserve.
But do you think that that act of blockading the truck was justified?
Look, you're talking about one truck, and as I understand, the truck went through, as have 100+ other trucks that continue to go through every single day. These families have their loved ones who have been held hostage 136 days. That includes young women who have, quite frankly, and we know that now, are subject to the most gruesome crimes, including rape, including sexual violence. The Red Cross has not seen a single one of these hostages. A baby, a 1-year-old, turned one in captivity and spent over a quarter of his life now under these Hamas dungeons, these tunnels in Gaza. The international community needs to put pressure on Hamas, not embrace them.
All right, we do appreciate your time here on the show. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Do appreciate that. That is Israeli human rights lawyer and the International Legal Forum CEO, Arsen Ostrovsky, of course, giving us his reaction there. And you can appreciate the fact that, I mean, he even took time out of Shabbat to even come and speak to us tonight, as, of course, we're looking at this ruling by the International Court of Justice. And he does talk about an important issue, which the court has touched on as well, and that is around the release of the hostages.